Hello and a very good evening to all of you. As you're all aware that the entire world is in the grip of COVID-19 pandemic, which shows no signs of abating. Hence, continuing with our outbreak special webinar series, today we shall be discussing lessons from respiratory disease outbreaks and relevance of adult pneumococcal vaccination in diabetes. Now, to take you through the presentation and discussion for the next 45 minutes to an hour, we have with us our eminent speaker, Dr. Pradeep V. Gadge. Dr. Gadge has over 15 years of experience in the field of internal medicine and diabetology. He has been a faculty in various national and international conferences. He has authored chapters on diabetes in textbooks and has also been a principal investigator on various clinical trials. Dr. Gadge is often quoted by media, both print and television media, with respect to diabetes, its complications and management and various other aspects. He holds Guinness Book of World Record for the world's largest diabetes health screening program done on a single day on 14th November 2013. That is a World Diabetes Day. Dr. Gadge has been associated with some leading hospitals in Mumbai. He was formerly visiting consultant in Breach Candy Hospital and Seven Hills Hospital, formerly clinical associate at Leelavati Hospital, SL Raheja Hospital, and All India Institute of Diabetes. And he's also a certified speaker by American Diabetic Association. Currently, Dr. Gadge is director, Dr. Gadge's Diabetes Care Center at Mumbai in Maharashtra. Sir, it is my honor and privilege to welcome you, and I hand over the floor to you for the proceedings. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Sachin, for the kind introduction. Today, I'll be speaking on basically on respiratory disease outbreaks and the relevance of adult pneumococcal vaccination, especially in the setting of patients which we see, that is diabetic patients. So the presentation flow will be like understanding respiratory diseases outbreak and its impact. We'll be talking on the relevance of adult immunization, especially when it comes to patients with multiple comorbidities and especially with patients who have diabetes. We will also review various scientific evidences to prioritize adult pneumococcal vaccine in routine management of diabetes. So I would take you back to your MBBS days. We were all taught that health, as officially defined by the World Health Organization, is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. But what we see in clinical practice, we are more so bothered about patients' physical health. We never bothered about the social and mental well-being of the patient. So basically, the psychology is a neglected aspect. Though I personally believe that every disease starts somewhere in your brain, especially when it comes to chronic disease segment. They have a lot of psychological problems which are never dealt with in clinical practice. So this is something which we don't do in our clinical practice. Similarly, we were taught one more thing during our MBBS days, that medicine is a science of healing and it comprises of two branches. So basically one is treatment and the other is prevention. Today we focus on treatment. Prevention is often neglected. There are various ways of prevention. Now, COVID has given a lot of importance to preventive measures, and we all have seen how social distancing, masking, hand washing, and various other measures like quarantine and all are helping. These are some of the measures which are very cheap to do, sometimes very difficult to implement by the public health authorities. Something which easily can be done otherwise is vaccination, but which is often forgotten. When it comes to vaccination, we know about vaccination and we are very serious about the whole issue of vaccination when it comes to the pediatric population, the children. But adult vaccination is a neglected field. As said by a renowned American physician, vaccines are the tugboats of preventive health. We should be giving more importance to vaccination even in the adult population. More so when they are at high risk of getting certain complications. There are various vaccine preventable diseases, and we have seen the way the mortality and morbidity of these diseases has drastically decreased in the last few decades. Smallpox was a menace, but when the vaccine came and when people were vaccinated, gradually the number of smallpox cases started decreasing. And finally, in 1977, the last case of smallpox was found in Somalia. And the vaccination was taken over, ended by 1980. In fact, those who have born before 1980s will must be having a scar on their hand, a big scar, because of the smallpox vaccine. So after that, the smallpox vaccination was stopped. This is how a vaccination strategy implemented properly can create significant difference when it comes to public health. Similarly, pulse polio regime, which was implemented, helped India eradicate polio. So you can say smallpox, polio, these diseases are now completely, totally eradicated. Take the examples of these other three diseases, like say diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus. We know how diphtheria was a dangerous disease. In fact, being in the medical college, which is attached to an infectious diseases hospital, that is Kasturba Hospital, I have seen a lot of cases of diphtheria during my undergraduation and post-graduation day. Diphtheria is a disease where there is pseudomembrane formation and the patient dies, dies because of oxygen deficiency. And it's a dangerous disease, very lethal disease, if not diagnosed appropriately. Similarly, pertussis. Pertussis usually happens in small kids. They get cough, sometimes to the extent that they get pneumonia, convulsions, and multiple complications. Similarly, tetanus. It has drastically decreased over the years. So, diphtheria and pertussis have decreased over the last few decades by almost more than 90%. Tetanus has decreased by more than 95%. This is what vaccine preventable diseases, when properly handled with vaccines, can actually happen. Now, coming to adult vaccination, which is the topic of the day. So why do adults need vaccine? See, adults may need vaccine because they might have lost immunity to the vaccine. Say, for example, we as kids were given DPT vaccine, diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus. But now, over the years, our antibody titer has decreased and we need immunity against these diseases. So, these vaccines may be given again. The other reason may be that we have never been vaccinated for these diseases, as is the example of, say, hepatitis B or hepatitis C or hepatitis A. When it comes to health workers, we are vaccinated with hepatitis B. But in our days, when we were kids, hepatitis B was not included in the immunization schedule, national immunization schedule. Now it is included in the national immunization schedule. Again, hepatitis A. If you want to develop immunity, you have to get vaccinated, or otherwise you have to suffer from the infection. Now, sometimes adult vaccination may be needed to protect the younger contacts. Say, for example, the grandfather, if the grandfather gets this sort of disease, he can pass on to his grandchildren, and they can get infected. So, the classical example being influenza or Tdap vaccines. Sometimes certain vaccines are only for adults. For example, the zoster vaccine. Usually, you get chickenpox during your childhood. The chickenpox episode gets cured, and the virus remains in your nerve ending. And when you become immunocompromised in the future, or the conditions favorable conditions prevail for the virus to reactivate, it reactivates and it causes herpes zoster. Herpes zoster, you all know, is a very dangerous and very painful condition. Sometimes the patient may get shock-like sensation, neuralgic pain, and it may last for months to years sometimes. So these are the examples where an adult may be vaccinated. Certain vaccines may be given to patients who are at risk, like the influenza vaccine and the pneumococcal vaccine. Classically, the sort of patients which we are going to talk about today, the diabetic sort of patients. Then adults may be vaccinated if they are traveling to certain areas where certain infections may be prevalent, like Japanese encephalitis. Again, if they are above the age of 65 years, due to the age, they become more prone to getting certain infections. These are the patients who can be vaccinated. And when students are going abroad for study, they can be vaccinated with vaccines like MMR. So these are the conditions when an adult is vaccinated. usually in the clinical setting. So this is what exactly I have discussed till now. Now we'll be discussing about respiratory outbreaks in the recent years. So I gave you overview of what vaccines are and why vaccines are given in adults. Now let's talk about respiratory outbreaks which have happened in the last, say, 30-40 years. Let's start from 1918, when the mother of all pandemics, Spanish flu, happened. So Spanish flu is a classical example of pandemic. It affected almost 50 crore people and almost 5 crore people died. In 1998, we saw the Nipah virus outbreak. Luckily, it was restricted to only 2 countries. One was Bangladesh and the other was India. Even in India, only Kerala got affected. In 2003, we saw the SARS outbreak, and it was talk of the town that time. Then in 2009, the swine flu epidemic. That is, it was actually a pandemic where almost 2.8 lakh people died. Then 2012, the MERS outbreak, which was localized to Middle East. In 2019, Ebola happened, which happened only in the African subcontinent. And now COVID-19 pandemic, which has affected almost 1.3 crore people by now, as of 13th July 2020, and almost 5.7 lakhs have died. Try to understand one simple thing. In 1918, the world population was 1.8 billion. Of this 1.8 billion, 50 crore people suffered from Spanish flu and 5 crore died. So the mortality rate was somewhere around 10%. Today, the world population is 7.8 billion. By now, almost 1.3 crore are affected and 5.7 lakhs have died. I have purposely put a question mark in front of the mortality rate. If you calculate the mortality rate, currently it will be somewhere around between 4 and 5, somewhere around 4.5 roughly. What I mean to say is, we have a lot of asymptomatic patients which are not detected. In fact, recently antibody testing for seroconversion was done in Delhi, which showed seroconversion in almost 15% of the patients. So almost 15% patients in those pockets which were investigated had suffered from symptomatic or asymptomatic SARS-CoV-2, that is COVID infection. In fact, recently, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the head of infectious diseases from US, he also commented that the figures given by the American authorities, government, must be much lesser, and actual figure must be almost 15 times of what is exactly being told in the media, because he feels that there are a lot of asymptomatic cases. So that is why I have put the mortality rate as question mark. We don't know what exactly the mortality rate is. Probably we'll know this after seroconversion rates are estimated by doing antibody testing over a period of time. What I mean to say is, a disease which created havoc when the population was just 1.8 million. Say, even if the mortality rate is 1%, say we are not detecting a lot of asymptomatic cases, and say the mortality rate is just 1%. Just imagine the sort of people, the sort of numbers of death which will happen by the time the pandemic starts waning off. And remember, there are only two ways of getting immunity to this. One is, sorry, not getting immunity. There are only two ways of getting rid of this disease. Either getting rid of the patients who died of COVID, or those who survived COVID and actually got immune to it. Unless and until we have a vaccine, or we are very lucky that the virus itself mutates itself to some milder form, which rarely happens. So what I mean to say is, unfortunately, this disease doesn't have a vaccine. Now let's talk about certain diseases where we already have vaccine, which are as problematic, or probably the mortality rate is much more, morbidity is much more than COVID. But they have not made headlines because patients, the number of people which were, COVID has affected, the number of people COVID has affected is tremendous over a small timeline, and it has drastically brought down the healthcare system of all the countries all over the world, all the major developed countries, developing countries all over the world. And gradually the disease will progress and move towards the underdeveloped country as well. So we have a whole lot of other diseases where patients can be vaccinated, and we can try and prevent at least death in those patients, death or suffering in those particular patients. Now, these respiratory diseases outbreak have had huge casualties and fatalities and also impacted large geographies across the globe. Now, when it comes to infectivity in various diseases, the H1N1, that is swine flu, the infectivity is one person can infect somewhere around 1.2 to 1.6 per person. SARS, it was 2 to 4. COVID, it is almost 2.5. Ebola, it was roughly around 2. MERS was a very rapidly spreading disease, but luckily it got localized in certain areas and it did not spread out of those areas. Now, when coming to the fatality rate, Ebola had a very high fatality of 40%, Nipah 77%, SARS 9.6, MERS 34%, and COVID as of now, unless we do the antibody testing of the masses, as of now we feel that the rates are somewhere around 3 to 5%, say. And it has affected almost all the countries in the world, almost all countries. So what have we learned from these respiratory outbreaks? We have learned. What did we learn from the media? We learned from the media that people in Italy are dying. And why did they die? Why did they die more than the rest of the world? Because they were older and they had a lot of other comorbidities. On the top of it, they were smokers. So what we learned from this respiratory disease outbreaks is elderly and comorbid patients have higher risk of infection. Also, understand one thing, many patients get viral infections to start with, but they then get secondarily infected with bacteria like pneumococci or H. influenza, Haemophilus influenza. I'm talking about Haemophilus influenza, which is a bacteria, not a virus. Or sometimes it does happen that a patient suffers with viral infection, the patient gets better with the viral infection, and then after that, after a few weeks, the patient develops pneumonia because of secondary infection due to pneumococcus. So pneumococcal vaccination has its own role. Now let's talk about pneumonias. I'm sure all of you know that there are 3 types of pneumonia in our clinical practice. One is community acquired pneumonia, the other is hospital acquired pneumonia when a patient gets hospitalized in the hospital, and the third is ventilator associated pneumonia. We'll keep the other 2 aside. The commonest is community acquired pneumonia. Now, community acquired pneumonia, which usually happens to most of the people who get hospitalized later, the most common cause is viruses, the second being bacteria. Fungi and parasitic infections are very rare and they usually happen in immunocompromised patients. So let's talk about viruses. So the most common virus which usually causes community acquired pneumonia is influenza, and then parainfluenza, and then there are a whole lot of other viruses which can cause. Bacteria, the most common being Streptococcus pneumoniae, which is also called as pneumococcus. There are almost more than 90 serotypes of this bacteria. Then the second commonest is Haemophilus influenza. So you understand that this influenza and this influenza is different. This is viral influenza and this is the name of the bacteria, Haemophilus influenza. So there is a difference. Now before I go to the main talk, let me talk about my practical experience which I have been seeing in the last few months. A lot has been spoken recently about heart failure and prevention of heart failure and how SGLT2 inhibitors help heart failure because of the SGLT2 company making a lot of noise, and we are knowing that this class of drugs are good for heart failure. Now I'll tell you some of my practical experience in my patients of COVID and heart failure. What I have learned over the last 3-4 months is COVID is not only a disease of the lung or the pharynx, it affects the heart dramatically. Some patients suffer myocarditis, some get acute coronary events, myocardial infarcts, some have electrophysiological abnormalities, and especially the chronic heart failure patient suffers a lot. The heart failure gets aggravated, and many a times it becomes very difficult to distinguish when a breathless patient comes. It's very difficult to understand whether this breathlessness is because of heart failure, because of COVID, whether he's getting into bronchopneumonia, whether he's getting into early cytokine storm, but very difficult to understand. Also, I would like to tell you other practical experience of mine. I have often seen patients suffering from, say, viral pneumonias or, say, pneumococcal pneumonias or any other pneumonia. They suffer mortality or morbidity. They reach the hospital. They are discharged after, say, a few days to few weeks, and they come back home. They are fine, but the disease renders them so weak and so susceptible to many problems that, especially if they are diabetic, smoker, COPD, or chronic heart patients like the CHF patient, chronic heart failure patient, they eventually develop mortality or morbidity or mortality as late as 6 months to 1 year. So the problem doesn't end with curing the pneumococcal infection then and there. It still persists. These were my practical experience. Now coming back to the today's topic. So as I told you earlier, elderly and comorbid patients, elderly and comorbid patients are at higher risk of infection, and the outcomes are also poor. I gave you the classical example of Italy. See the case fatality rate in COVID. See, as the age is increasing, the case fatality rate is increasing. So see, above the age of 80, it's almost 14-15%. Similarly, when there are comorbidities, the chances of the patient dying are more. Patients who have cardiovascular disease, almost 10%, more than 10%. Then comes diabetes, almost 7%, and then various other diseases. The problem happens when a patient has multiple comorbidities, which is very common. A diabetic patient usually won't have only diabetes. A long-standing diabetic patient will usually have hypertension, cardiovascular disease, sometimes many other problems as well. We also know that there is a strong association between diabetes, cancers, obesity. So again, this adds to the comorbidities, and the fatality rate increases. So basically, when there are multiple comorbidities, the outcome will be poor. This is what we learned from COVID. Also, pneumococcal pneumonia have been commonly seen as co-infection. That is what I told you earlier. I told you how a patient recovers out of viral infection, but gradually a few days later or a few weeks later develops bacterial infection. Now, what were the key learnings from these respiratory outbreaks which happened? Prevention and treatment of secondary bacterial infection should be an integral part of pandemic planning. In fact, if you see, the World Health Organization never advocated influenza and pneumococcal vaccine in normal people. It always said in high risk patients, in high risk people like diabetics, elderly, having multiple comorbidities. But now the World Health Organization said for every person can think of administering himself pneumococcal and even HIV vaccine. That is what the WHO has said in the COVID pandemic times, because presently we can say that probably everyone is high risk, because probably say everyone is at high risk of getting COVID infection the way it is spreading. Improving uptake of routine pneumococcal vaccination in adults with an indication may reduce the impact of the pandemic. So pneumococcal vaccination will have an impact on the pandemic by reducing the number of hospitalizations. We all know that presently we have shortage of drugs like remdesivir, tocilizumab. We have We don't have sufficient bed. We don't have sufficient doctors to treat them. In fact, these days I have started talking to my patients and telling them to take utmost care to prevent infections like dengue, malaria, typhoid. It is nothing pertaining to this talk, but a common sense thing that in case if they get even a milder malaria or a mild dengue, and if they end up not getting a bed in the hospital, they may seriously complicate and they may, reach a fatal end. So it's very important in this setting, in today's setting of COVID, where there is lack of bed, lack of resources, to prevent other infections which will take you to the hospital and you may not get bed. The rate of bacterial co-infection may be underestimated as many cases are not tested for bacterial infection. This is so true. So when a classical case of pneumonia is admitted in the hospital, we not always try to find out which bacterial infection it is. We empirically treat them with antibiotics. So many a times, either we never find the bacterial infection, or we don't reach the source of bacterial infection. So we many a times just diagnose it as viral pneumonia when it actually is bacterial infection. Or many a times it so happens that the antibiotics are so broad spectrum that all the bacteria are wiped off. So vaccination against Streptococcus pneumonia is often neglected in pandemic planning, but could have a positive impact on mortality and morbidity. Now let's see what are the current recommendations on adult pneumococcal immunization from various scientific bodies during the times of COVID. I'm saying during the time of COVID. The American College of Cardiology recommends influenza vaccine and pneumococcal vaccine. The NFID, National Foundation for Infectious Diseases, says as there is no vaccine available to prevent COVID-19, at least ensure that influenza and pneumococcal vaccine are given, so that there is reduction on the burden on the healthcare by preventing at least vaccine preventable disease. And as I told you earlier, in fact, the World Health Organization has gone a step ahead probably, and they have told that even though vaccines such as Haemophilus influenza type B vaccine or pneumococcal vaccine cannot prevent the new coronavirus, they should be recommended to protect against respective respiratory illnesses. Now coming to the type of patients which we treat, diabetics. Diabetics are at increased risk of respiratory infection. We all know that. In fact, diabetics are at increased risk of every sort of infection because of their decreased immunity and because of the defects in various T cell, immune response, antibody response, and number of various immune dysfunction which a diabetic patients suffer from. So a diabetics are 6 times more likely than the non-diabetics to get hospitalized. With a diagnosis of flu, influenza, they are 3 times more likely to die due to pneumonia or flu. Also, among diabetics, death rate increased by 5 to 15% during flu epidemics. This is very important. Case fatality rate for flu is about 12%, while those for pneumococcal infection ranges from 21 to 36%. See, very high. So in such a scenario, why should we miss on protecting diabetic adults from vaccine preventable respiratory diseases like adult pneumococcal disease and influenza? We should not. Now, is pneumococcal disease a real cause of concern? Let's see that. So these are the figures from 2016. So almost 24 lakh roughly people died because of lower respiratory tract infection in 2016, and almost 50% of them because of Streptococcus pneumonia. So that is the burden because of Streptococcus pneumonia. As per World Health Organization, 6 to 8 lakh adults lose their life to invasive pneumococcal disease. I'll discuss exactly what I mean by invasive pneumococcal disease. See, when it comes to pneumococcal disease, we are so obsessed with pneumonia that we just think of pneumonia. But pneumococcus can cause something as mild as sinusitis to pharyngitis to bronchitis to pneumonia to meningitis. So there is a wide spectrum of presentation that the patient can present. And actually, invasive pneumococcal disease predominantly affects older patients and especially those who have comorbidities. And pneumococcal disease is much more than IPD. What I mean to say is why we are less bothered about IPD, or why we are so obsessed with pneumococcus causing pneumonias, because the other things are rare. This sinusitis and bronchitis, we rarely go to the extent where we discover and where we investigate and find that the patient had bronchitis because of pneumococcus. So we never find that out. And the invasive pneumococcal disease like meningitis and all are not that common as much as the pneumococcal disease. So invasive pneumococcal disease, what is invasive pneumococcal disease? As I told you, when bacteremia happens, when meningitis happens, or when bacteremic pneumococcal pneumonia happens, this is invasive pneumococcal pneumonia. This forms, say, roughly you can say 1 in 3 or probably 40% of the patients must be, of the total spectrum of pneumococcal disease, must be invasive pneumococcal disease. That comes pneumococcal pneumonia and community acquired pneumonia and the other things. So invasive pneumococcal disease is just a subset of the total morbidity and mortality which pneumococcus causes. Now, it's unfortunate to know that even in the 21st century, even in 2020, a lot of patients in India die because of infectious diseases. And do you know what is the most common cause for most common infectious disease for causing mortality in Indian population? Unfortunately, even in the 2020, it is diarrhea. So diarrhea is the #1 infectious disease killer in India. Second comes pneumonia, and community acquired pneumonia is the second most common reason of death from infectious diseases in India. Of the total number of patients who suffer with CAP, that is community acquired pneumonia, 36% have streptococcus pneumoniae. And of this, as I told you earlier, roughly 40%, so 40% of 36, say you can say roughly 9% of all CAP patients have invasive disease due to streptococcus pneumonia. Now, the WHO 2008 report says that Indian subcontinent contributes the largest share of pneumococcal disease burden in Asia. That is the importance of controlling pneumococcal disease in our country. Now, is it possible to reduce pneumococcal disease burden? So, what steps you can do? Say the sort of steps which we are doing for COVID, say washing hands, masking ourselves. Similarly, certain steps like avoiding overcrowded places, avoiding damp environment, all these things can be done. But besides this, what you can do is vaccination. Vaccination is the best way and the easiest way to prevent pneumococcal disease. Pneumococcal vaccines help protect against some of the more than 90 types of pneumococcal bacteria. So, as I told you earlier also, pneumococcal bacteria, pneumococcus, has more than 90 serotypes as of now. And if you see the recommendations by various authorities from various countries, they say that all patients above the age of 60 or 65, some countries it's 60, some countries it is 65, I think now it should be brought down to 60, should be vaccinated for pneumococcus. And immunocompromised patient especially, and immunocompetent patient above the age of about the age of 60, 65, and immunocompromised patient even below the age of 65 should be given vaccines. Now, does adult pneumococcal vaccine have any role in diabetes management? I don't mean by diabetes management the sugar management aspect, the other aspect of diabetes management, which is prevention of mortality and morbidity. Yes, diabetes is a disease which is associated with higher chances of invasive pneumococcal pneumonia, as I told you, meningitis and the other dangerous type of invasive pneumococcal pneumonia, and even pneumococcal pneumonia. So diabetics have 3 times higher chances of getting both the problems. Again, the risk of invasive pneumococcal disease in adults with diabetes increases with progressing age. As I showed you earlier with COVID, here also the invasive disease. Even in COVID, the chances of suffering with morbidity and mortality, going into cytokine storm, going into complications, ARDS, going into bronchopneumonia, usually increases as the age progresses. Similarly, here also, as the age progresses, complications, chances of getting severe disease increases. But if you see, whether it be old or young patient, just being diabetic increases your risk 3 times. So that's very important. Now, what is the evidence of PPSV23 in preventing adult pneumococcal disease? Now, I hope your concepts are clear. What is pneumococcus? It's a bacteria. It causes various sort of diseases, from sinusitis to bronchitis to pneumonia to meningitis. These are the different presentations with pneumococcus can cause. Now, prevention of pneumococcal diseases. There are 2 types of vaccine. One is the conjugate vaccine, that is PCV13 conjugate vaccine, and the other is PPSV, that is polysaccharide vaccine. So pneumococcal polysaccharide vaccine 23. So this has 23 serotypes, that has 13 serotypes. Now, what is the difference between both the vaccines? I'll tell you. So PCV13 is a conjugated vaccine. It prevents, or it offers immunity against those 13 serotypes, 13 serotype. And PPSV has 23, offers protection against 23 serotypes. PCV has a higher antigenic load and offers higher antibody development. When you administer someone PCV13, the antibody titer which is developed is much higher as compared to PPSV. But antibody titer which develops PPSV is also sufficient enough to protect you. PCV13 is to be given in children below the age of 2 years. It can be given above that as well, but the recommendations are below the age of 2 years. You can't give PPSV, this vaccine, Pneumovax 23, in patients below below the age of 2 years. Now let's see what is the efficacy and the effectiveness of PPSV. It's quite effective and efficacious. 82% effective, 73% efficacious. Now, even in patients who had diabetes, the efficacy against prevention of invasive pneumococcal disease was somewhere around 84%. Do you know what is the biggest killer? Which is the biggest killer all over the world? It's cardiovascular disease. Which is the second biggest killer? It's cancers. And the third biggest killer, lower respiratory tract infection. And the fourth is COPD. Diabetes is much behind. It is on the 7th number. COPD is very common. Unfortunately, COPD is not often diagnosed in our clinical setting. We don't pick up symptoms. Even a lot of ladies have COPD who have never smoked, especially those who are from the native place, because of this chula and all. They cook on chula, and that is why they get COPD. So COPD is not uncommon. It's a very common problem. Most of the times underdiagnosed. Now you know how COPD patients keep on getting exacerbations during winters, whenever the season change, with milder viral infections also. So they keep on getting exacerbation every now and then, and with every exacerbation the disease process complicates. We now know that COPD is not only a disease of the lungs, it's an inflammatory disorder and it affects the entire body. Just as diabetes is not the disease of just pancreas, it's a disease of the entire body. Similarly, COPD is much beyond lungs. It affects your entire body. So prevention of COPD exacerbation is very important. Just as I told you my practical experiences with COVID, that exacerbations or that precipitation of certain pneumococcal pneumonia, or say some of my patients who suffered with say COVID. In fact, I think yesterday itself there was a news in the Times saying that patients who have suffered with COVID continue to suffer even few weeks or months later with various symptoms like myalgia and all. Similarly, COPD patients also, they have exacerbation, they suffer, and then the exacerbation goes off and they keep suffering for a long time. In fact, with every exacerbation, the pulmonary functions come down. So it is very important to avoid COPD exacerbations in this type of patient. They are at higher risk. This study shows that there is a significant reduction in COPD exacerbation after PPSV vaccination. So higher reduction in COPD exacerbations in COPD patient, and especially those who had comorbidities like diabetes mellitus. Now coming to the serotypes, I have already given you an overview of how many serotypes PPSV covers. PPSV covers 23 serotypes, and PCV, the other vaccine by some other company, covers 13 serotypes. So PPSV offers broadest serotype coverage with any pneumococcal vaccine available. PCV 13 serotypes, PPSV or PPV you can say 23 serotypes. It will be important to know that almost 80% of invasive serotypes, streptococcal serotypes causing disease in adults in India are included in PPSV. So PPSV will protect you from most of the invasive or dangerous type of serotypes. 66% is the coverage offered by PPSV, whereas 48% is the coverage offered by PCV 13. Similarly, 67% of the IPD, that is invasive pneumococcal disease in our country, is caused by the 23 serotypes included in PPSV. On the other hand, only 57.5% are covered with the other vaccine. So it's more prudent to give a vaccine with 23 serotypes, especially in adults. Obviously, you can't give this PPSV 23 in children less than 2 years, but others, you should try and give this vaccine. Now, relevant serotype coverage in India. So PPSV, this vaccine offers coverage to all the 5 common serotypes in adults. Also, you know that now more and more children are being vaccinated with PCV, because parents are understanding the importance of preventing pneumonia in children. The pediatricians have become more aggressive. More societies are advising pneumococcal vaccination in childhood, and because of this, more and more children are being given PCV 13. Now, what exactly happens when a particular vaccine is given? The bacterial serotypes try to change itself so as to prevail. They want to sustain, so they will try to change the serotypes so that the vaccine after a few years becomes ineffective for the newer types of serotypes which have developed, and a newer type of vaccine might have to be launched. This classically happens with viruses where mutation happens, and you have to keep on changing the vaccine say every year. A classical example is the flu vaccine. Flu vaccine immunity lasts only for 1 year. Why 1 year? Because the viruses will change over time. Now coming back to this vaccine, so changing serotype prevalence in the light of childhood vaccination. So as more and more children are being vaccinated, with PCV, there is a large decline. There is a large decline in the effectivity of this vaccine in adults. On the other hand, because the serotypes are changing and people are becoming immune to this, the viruses are becoming the bacteria is becoming immune to it. The other serotypes, there is a 50% increase in IPD related to the 11 unique serotypes in PPSV 23, and hence again administering a PPSV 23 will offer more protection over PCV. Again, there is a significant reduction in the IPD related to PCV serotypes in older adults due to indirect effect of the 5 years of childhood PCV vaccination, which I told you earlier. Now, importance of pneumococcal vaccination as compared to flu vaccination. We all know that flu vaccination is the most important. Say if a diabetic patient comes to me and I offer him these two vaccines, influenza and pneumococcal, and if he is willing to pay only for one and he cannot afford two vaccines, the most important vaccine I would give him is the influenza vaccine. The problem with influenza vaccine is you will have to keep on giving it every year. As I told you, the viral strains keep on changing. In pneumococcal, you have to give it once. It is costlier than the flu vaccine, but it has to be given once, except in certain subset of patients, which I will discuss it later. So flu is the most commonly used vaccine in adult. In fact, some of the countries, it is recommended that everyone, even normal adults, should get themselves vaccinated for flu every year. That high is the proportion of patients suffering with flu. I am sure all the attendees who are listening to this, I am sure no one can say that you have never suffered with flu. Everyone suffers with flu. And flu can be of various different types. In fact, the vaccination, which is commonly given in our country, the tetravalent vaccine, which has 4 strains, covers H1N1, that is the swine flu, H3N3, and 2 other types of vaccine, 2 other types of viruses. So, and every year the strain keeps on changing. So every year there will be different, the vaccine will keep on changing. Again, understand that the flu vaccine is different for northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere, because the type of viruses prevalent in the northern hemispheres are different and in the southern hemisphere are different. Now, India typically lies in between, but for practical purposes we consider India in the southern hemisphere because we see those type of viruses prevalent in the society. So the ideal time to give a flu vaccine in a country like India would be somewhere around this month, July. On the other hand, in countries like in those which are in the European countries or say in the US, it would be more prudent to give it somewhere in the month of Feb or March. Now coming to the risk of pneumonia because of pneumococcus versus because of flu. Flu affects more people but causes less morbidity. Understand this, flu affects more people but causes less morbidity, especially less hospitalization, less pneumonia as compared to these bacteria. On the other hand, pneumococci causes more hospitalization. So pneumonia related hospitalization and death rates are much higher than that of influenza. So if you see in the US in 2013, death because of flu were somewhere around 3,550, almost 15 times higher when it came to pneumonia. And remember, this flu even had a significant proportion of swine flu component, and in spite of that, this was the scenario. So over the years, the hospitalization rates due to pneumonia are much higher than the hospitalization rates of influenza. Also similarly, mortality because of pneumonia is much higher than influenza. One-time vaccination for pneumococcal disease is as essential as annual flu vaccine. Now coming to recommendations. What are the recommendations in adults with diabetes? We will talk about diabetes. The American Diabetic Association recommends that diabetics between the age of 19 to 64 years should be given 1 dose of Pneumovax 23. On the other hand, those who are more than 65 years should be given 1 additional dose, because after 65 your antibody producing capacity goes down, your immunity goes down because of age. In fact, I am very confident that this should gradually come down to 60, and it will come down to 60 in the times to come. What does the RSSDI say? The RSSDI says that all diabetic patients should be educated about administering at least the influenza and pneumococcal vaccine, if not the Hib, MMR and the other vaccines. At least these 2 vaccines should be, the patient should be told about. Vaccination against pneumococcal disease including pneumococcal pneumonia with PCV13, is recommended for children below the age of 2 years. And when it comes to about 2 years, you should prefer PPSV23, that is Pneumovax 23. Above the age of 65, you have to give one additional dose. So these are the recommendations. So finally, I would summarize. And before, in fact, before I summarize, I would say that as healthcare workers, today, we are also at very high risk of getting COVID. And if, God forbid, it gets complicated with flu or say pneumococcal infection, the problem will be much more. So let's at least try and motivate all healthcare workers to get vaccinated for flu and PPSV. In fact, as I told you earlier, the World Health Organization said that in the COVID setting, you should think of vaccinating everyone with pneumococcal as well as Hib vaccine. Now, what is the summary of the talk? Pneumococcal disease is associated with significant burden in India. I showed you what sort of death and mortality and morbidity is happening. Many countries across the globe have adopted adult pneumococcal vaccination program to prevent pneumococcal disease. Unfortunately, in our country, adult vaccination is not that much, has not gained grounds. Adults with diabetes are at higher risk of getting invasive pneumococcal disease and pneumococcal pneumonia. Pneumovax has established effectiveness. I showed you how effective it is, and the sort of broad and relevant serotype, 23 serotypes. And of the dangerous serotypes, almost 80% are getting covered. So that is what is the advantage with this type of vaccine. One-time vaccination for pneumococcal disease is as essential as annual flu vaccine. And the ADA recommends one dose of PPSV in everyone at least between the age of 19 to 64 with diabetes, and an additional dose in those who are more than 65, regardless of vaccination history. So I hope the take-home message is simple. In COVID times, we don't want to reach the hospital. There are no beds, doctors are less, resources are scarce. Let's use them more so for COVID patients and the non-COVID patients who are otherwise also inevitably suffering with diseases, let's say like ischemic heart disease. People are not getting bed in the hospital. They suffer myocardial infarct, they are not getting bed in the hospital. Why add to the existing problem? Let's educate more and more people about vaccinating themselves with at least these two things, influenza and pneumococcal vaccine. Finally, before ending, I would tell you what are the future vaccines which are going to come. Probably these are some of the vaccines which may come in the near future, and there has been a lot of research going on, but it's not that easy to make a vaccine. A simple vaccine like chickenpox took more than 22 years. HIV, it has been 40 odd years. All the countries all over the world are behind this, but not able to find a vaccine. A dengue vaccine had come, but it failed miserably, caused a lot of adverse reactions, and then there are a lot of other diseases. And the most awaited vaccine is COVID-19 vaccine. Finally, I would end by saying, whatever we learned today, you understood the concepts of vaccination, at least in high-risk patients, but knowing is not enough. We must apply. Willing is not enough. We must do. Thank you.
Sir,
I'll
thank
be
you very
happy if
much.
there are some questions from your side.
Right, sir. Sir, thank you very much. That was indeed a very informative presentation, and we have got many questions lined up. So, with your permission, shall we go ahead?
Surely.
So, the first question which has come is, what special precautions are you taking to prevent yourself and your staff from getting COVID during these times?
Okay, a good question. See, I would tell you presently, actually, we have a staff of 27 working in our clinic, and we have kept our clinic open for all the days during this lockdown and currently also. And I'm proud to say that not a single person in our clinic has off now caught COVID infection. The reason is everyone has been very well educated about hand washing, using mask. Everyone has been made aware of using 2 masks. Everyone wears a cap. In fact, most of the people have shaved off their hair like me. We have actually told them what is the importance of fomite and how a person keeps touching their head umpteen number of times a day, almost 1000 to 1500 times you touch your face, head, and that is how you carry fomites. So everyone has been educated, right from the receptionist to the assistant doctor to the dietitian. Everyone has been educated about it, and they know what exactly has to be done. Everyone has been given sufficient number of N95 masks. Everyone wears double gloves. Also, besides this, I have seen to it that none of my staff uses public transport. They come to our clinic in the vehicles provided by us. We have told them how to prevent infection in their locality. They are taking care of that. Everyone in our clinic is on HCQ prophylaxis, though it's a controversial thing, but I personally feel that HCQ works at least in prevention of complication, and everyone, including myself, my wife, who is again a doctor, and entire staff is taking HCQ prophylaxis. In our clinic, we offer gloves, plastic gloves to everyone who enters the clinic. So when a patient comes to our clinic, before entering, he is given plastic gloves. Everyone who comes to our clinic, it is compulsory that he should be wearing a mask. There are a lot of patients who are coming with N95 or sophisticated type of mask, but with a valve. Now understand that these masks with valve protect the wearer, not the others. Their breath is coming out through that valve. So such patients, we ask them to tie an additional handkerchief or something if they come with this sort of mask. In fact, we are very soon starting with providing shields to all our elderly patients. 60 plus patients, will be giving it free from our side. In our clinic, we have put acrylic partition at the reception so that the patient directly doesn't face the receptionist. We have put that sort of acrylic partition in our chambers also, so that only if the patient has to be examined, then we open the acrylic door and examine the patient, or the patient remains behind the acrylic. So a number of things we have done. Also, we have seen to it that influenza and pneumococcal vaccine have been given to our staff. So these are some of the measures which we have taken. I don't say that we are still absolute foolproof and we won't get COVID, but I'm sure that no one will get COVID in our clinic. They may bring it from outside. That sort of precaution we have taken all these 3.5 4 months we have been practicing.
Right, sir. Sir, that is indeed a very laudable effort. Sir, which all vaccines are absolutely mandatory for diabetics, sir? I'm not talking about this period, COVID, with COVID, without COVID. These are the vaccines which diabetic individuals should take.
See, influenza vaccine and pneumococcal vaccine, I would advocate to every diabetic patient, especially those who are above the age of 50. Because the problem is in our setting is most of the patients are tired of polypharmacy. I would advocate actually to every diabetic, even a 20-year-old, even a 30-year-old diabetic patient. But sometimes because of the polypharmacy, because of the cost issues, because of the finances, at least everyone above the age of 50. And if finances or cost is not a problem, then every diabetic patient I would advise.
Right, sir.
These two vaccines at least.
Sorry, since you mentioned about HCQ prophylaxis, somebody has asked how to take this HCQ prophylaxis. Maybe you can throw some line.
See, the ICMR advocates HCQ prophylaxis in a particular fashion. On day one, say we started on a Sunday, on a typical Sunday, the way we started, we have made a group and everyone puts their mask number, which mask number they are wearing. Everyone puts whether they have taken HCQ. Everyone puts their hand wash count. This is what I have made compulsory for my entire staff. So in this group, we started, when we started with HCQ prophylaxis, we started putting, and those who are above 50 kgs, we started them on 800 milligrams on day one. This is as per the ICMR guidelines. 400 milligrams, 2 tablets taken apart along with pantoprazole. And thereafter, every Sunday, we are taking 1 tablet of 400 milligrams of hydroxychloroquine and pantoprazole. So this we are continuing since last few weeks. This is how it should be taken.
Right, sir. Sir, which pneumococcal vaccine would you recommend for a young diabetic, say somebody who's around 40, 35, 40, 45, and say a senior diabetic individual around 70
Whether
to
it be
75?
senior or anyone above the age of say any diabetic patient coming to my clinic, obviously not below the age of 2 years, other diabetic patients, especially above the age of 18 years, I would advise a polysaccharide vaccine, PPSV23. Whether
Right, sir.
whether the patient may be 30-year-old or 70-year-old. The only thing is, it will be a single dose in a 30-year-old or 40-year-old, and in a patient who is more than 65, I would advise a repeat vaccination. Or otherwise, in a patient who is having multiple comorbidities, say like CSF leak, or say a cancer patient where the antibody production in this particular patient may be lesser than normal, in this sort of patients, I may tell them to take a PCV because the immunogenicity of that vaccine is higher, and later to supplement it with PPSV23. That is what I would advise.
Right, sir. Sir, then a question which is often asked, I think it's a more practical question, probably you can relate to this. We do want to vaccinate, but because of the ongoing circumstances sometimes, and because of the high patient load, we forget about it. Although we do want to vaccinate, a lot of doctors have asked this, sir. So, any tips which you would like to share from your experience as to how can one keep it on top of their head, sir?
See, I think a diabetes educator can play a great role in this. When the patient goes to consult the dietitian or the diabetes educator, which is routinely done in at least in our sort of setting, the dietitian it should become a part and parcel of her tips and advices which she gives. So a diabetes educator not only talks about diet, he talks about exercises, he talks about how to take the medicine, what will be the probable side effect of this medicine. Similarly, she should talk about vaccination and how vaccination should be given, and the cost effectiveness of the vaccine, because a lot of patients feel कि 2000 का 3000 का वैक्सीन लेना है, worth है क्या? So if they understand that one hospitalization will cost at least a lakh, taking a vaccine of 2000 or 3000 rupees is worth it. That is what they should be told. The other thing is, in settings where the doctors do not have so many assistants the way we have in our clinic, at least putting up some something on the notice board or giving some pamphlet sort of thing to each and every patient about vaccination, or putting it in the file can probably help. Like the do's and don'ts which you should be doing yearly or 5 yearly. I mean, most diabetologists give their patient that lipid profile should be done say every 6 months, HbA1c should be done every 3 months. Similarly, you can put that flu vaccine should be taken every month, and pneumococcal vaccine should be taken at least once. Talk to your doctor. I think probably this can make those patients aware, and those patients themselves will come to you and ask leading question. That can be effective probably.
Right, sir. Sir, then somebody has asked, there are a lot of webinars on heart failure and a patient SGLT2. So what is your take on SGLT2 and CVD, sir?
See, SGLT2 inhibitors are wonder drugs for heart failure patients, and they have shown, various studies have shown, and it is not only with one SGLT2 inhibitor, it is with various SGLT2 inhibitors, that the chances of heart failure and the hospitalization due to heart failure drastically comes down because of SGLT2 inhibitors. In fact, I am sure that SGLT2 inhibitor started as a drug for diabetologists and endocrinologists, and gradually it is fast picking up among the cardiology and the nephrology fraternity, and very soon they will hijack the molecule from, especially the cardiologists will hijack the molecule from nephrologist, from diabetologist and endocrinologist. Similarly, it has shown wonderful effects in the kidney patients also. So I think these are some of the other subgroups where it can be used. In fact, a lot of studies have been done in non-diabetic patients who are having heart failure, and this class of drugs have helped them.
Right, sir. Sir, then can pneumococcal vaccine be also used to prevent non-IPD infections like sinusitis?
Obviously, see, when you vaccinate a patient, as I told you, 23, those 23 serotypes, see, a significant number of those 23 serotypes may also cause sinusitis and all those things. So overall, the entire gamut of diseases which is caused by pneumococcus can be reduced with this vaccine. It is not only the invasive pneumococcal disease.
Right. Sir, on your thoughts, in case if a patient has been tested as COVID positive, is admitted to the hospital and then discharged,
Okay.
is it advisable to recommend pneumococcal and flu vaccine at the time of discharge, or should it be offered little later?
See, absolutely, there is no harm in giving pneumococcal and influenza vaccine to a patient who has just suffered with COVID. As I have told you, a lot of viral infections happen and the sufferings continue. In fact, many a times the patient becomes bedridden at home, is inactive, the cough reflex is depressed, and they may develop pneumonia later after going home. So there is no harm in giving this sort of vaccination. You can give one influenza on one arm, pneumococcal on the other arm. The only thing is, if the patient is rendered very weak and in a stage where he is just recovering out of the disease and where his antibody production against SARS is already going on in the body, probably I may delay it by a few weeks. The other thing is, when you give a vaccine of pneumococcus or influenza, and if at all the patient gets fever, then again there will be a panic button which will be pressed. I mean, the patient will become more anxious. So probably for that reason, depending on the patient, I may delay it. So I think it should be an individualized decision for that particular patient rather than giving a blanket statement.
Right, sir. Right. Sir, how do you tackle the cost-related queries from the patients and some reluctance on the part of the patient if they ask, should I take this vaccine? अभी मुझे लेना है, ये ज़रूरी है, is it necessary? How, as a physician, how do you tackle those kind of queries?
See, the thing is, especially those patients who are suffering with diseases like, say, chronic heart failure, say, cirrhosis, or all those who have already gone into multiple comorbidities. If you explain them, they and who have already been hospitalized, say 2 to 3 times of late, will understand the importance of prevention of one hospitalization. So it's not that difficult in convincing them. The problem is about convincing the other patients, because when vaccination is advised, these are the other things which go on the back of the mind of patient, and they usually tend to ignore that. The other thing is, if you have vaccination facility in your clinic, probably the rates of patient taking vaccine may improve, because when you write it on the paper and send them off to the general practitioner or to a pediatrician or to someone else for taking those vaccine, probably that is the time when they have a lot of other thoughts. They Google, they do a lot of research, a lot of people tell them it's not compulsory, it's not needed, and then they probably drop out. So I think having a in-house vaccination center, especially in hospital settings, or doctors who are having huge diabetic centers, big clinics, at least in those settings it is possible, I think.
Right, sir. Sir, you have given a very elaborative presentation, and we are coming to an end of the session. So, one final take-home message from your side, sir, and before we wind up.
See, COVID is going to create menace for a long time. It's not going to end soon. Finding a vaccine for COVID is not easy. Whatever may be the deadline given by various people, 15th August and whatsoever, it's not that easy. The entire humanity is trying to find a vaccine against an RNA virus called as HIV since last 40 years, and we have not been successful. So understand what is important is taking care of yourself by masking yourself, following hygiene properly, social distancing, physical distancing, and importantly, preventing other diseases so that you don't reach doctors or hospital because they are already overburdened. I would talk of every disease, starting from malaria, dengue, to pneumococcus, to influenza. For these two diseases like influenza and pneumococcal, at least you have vaccine. For the other diseases, I would advise you, take proper care of yourself. Boil water at home so that you don't get infections like hepatitis A, you don't get typhoid. Use mosquito nets, use repellents at home so that chances of getting malaria and dengue decreases, because even these diseases will complicate and take you to the hospital. So this is my message, that don't burden the already overburdened healthcare, at least till COVID gets over. And remember, COVID will get over only in either of these three ways. One is a patient suffers and gets immunity, a patient dies, or if we are lucky, the virus converts itself to a lesser mutant variant. These are the only three ways. The third is a rare possibility. So let's hope that the fourth, that is the vaccine, comes as soon as possible. But till then, take care of yourself and be vigilant for the other diseases. Thank you.
Sir, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. In fact, I've got quite a few remarks saying that it was an excellent presentation, very nice presentation from the audience, and a very insightful discussion. I'm sure this will go a long way in addressing the queries and doubts with respect to taking care during COVID times, as well as vaccination, especially pneumococcal vaccination, and help the physicians in making the right choice for the benefit of their patient. And we know, sir, that you keep very busy. So we would like to thank you for taking time out from a busy schedule for this webinar. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, Dr. Sachin. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And thanks to all the audience also.